Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 189 of Humanity Rising. I hope everyone had a good weekend. I hope everyone is ready for this next week. I want to just begin our program today by extending our deep sympathies and concern for what's been happening in the state of Texas. Many of you may have been hearing about the polar vortex that descended on the state about, it was a week, 10 days ago, with brutal, brittle cold and ice and snow that essentially shut down the entire state energy grid. And the refineries, the transmission installations froze. And people all across the state of Texas, by the millions, were without heat and then without water. And the situation continues over the weekend. It appears to be getting a little bit better. But I wanted to start with what's been happening in Texas today, because it's an example of a couple of things that are currently afflicting our world. The COVID pandemic continues to operate. The United States is approaching 500,000 deaths, 4% of the human population, and between 20 and 25% of all the COVID cases in the world. And the hospitalizations and the deaths are happening inside America. And then on top of that, there's climate change and the extreme weather events that have been afflicting people all over the world, not just in the United States, but just using Texas as the most recent example. The extreme weather events due to climate change have brutally shut the energy grid down. And it was an energy grid that was designed for no extreme weather events. It didn't have any resilience built in, no excess power planned for. The Texans actually had withdrawn from the national energy grid back in the 1930s because Texas does it bigger and better. And now they've been revealed to be in crisis mode because they didn't plan ahead and they haven't taken the reality of climate change seriously. The second point I want to make is around consciousness, which is our theme for today. The first thing that the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, and Fox News and the alt-right and the Republican Party said they blamed it on green energy. Here you have a state that is completely dominated by oil and gas, but they used the crisis not to in any way reflect on what's just happened, but to blame it on green energy, which was a complete falsehood, another big lie coming from the right wing, and they did it with determination and great energy, and began to obscure the realities that all of us know, not only the state of Texas, but the world at large need to deal with. So we're seeing just how far we have to go. The denial about reality is strong around the world. And so there is nothing more important than to remind ourselves of that very simple truth that had been known for thousands of years, but which Albert Einstein put in a single sentence, that the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve it. That's just an axiom without exceptions. Humanity Rising was initiated last spring in the midst of the pandemic as an attempt on the part of Ubiquity University and over 300 organizations worldwide to bring new consciousness into the world, because it's only through new consciousness that we're going to solve any of our problems. At a time when the scientists are telling us we're running out of time to solve our problems. And that's why we broadcast day in and day out, offering solutions, ideas, visions, hopes, scenarios for how this battered world of ours, in which we've decimated 70% of the biodiversity in the last 50 years, according to the World Wildlife Fund. How can we revitalize, regenerate through a radical transformation of consciousness? That's the only issue, in my view, with which the human race now needs to grapple. How do we change consciousness? If we can, at a global level, and scale it so that there's a critical mass of change agents unleashed on planet Earth over the next several years, we'll probably survive. If we don't, we won't. That's an emerging scientific consensus. So it's with great pleasure today that I want to welcome our panel on the consciousness required for co-creation. And we're doing it in honor of a great consciousness changer of our time who passed into her next phase of growth and development some years ago, Barbara Marx Hubbard. I knew her well, as did many of you. Barbara was a beacon of light, an indefatigable crusader for new consciousness. And she worked all over the world with an enthusiasm and an optimism and a hopefulness that inspired all of us to continually rededicate our lives for the evolutionary leap that must take place if we're to preserve the world as we know it with the abundance required for our children under the fourth generation. So in that spirit, I want to invite Purya, who is convening this program. She has been an evolutionary leader for many decades. She's been working on consciousness metamorphosis. She's interviewed well over 100 evolutionary leaders all over the world over the last few years, has been a participant in Humanity Rising. So Purya, I want to welcome you warmly in the spirit of Barbara Marx Hubbard and turn the program and our initial meditation over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim, for this warm introduction and also these clear words about the state we are in. And before I introduce my colleagues and friends here, I really want to take a moment for all of us to come into a coherent resonance field. And maybe if you feel comfortable, you want to close your eyes for a moment, or at least bring your awareness inside. And I want to invite you to, for a moment, connect with this life impulse animating your physical body right now. This incredible life force. And we often overlook how incredible it is to have this opportunity to live in a physical body and be able to express and experience the depth of who or what we are. This physical body with its senses is just the surface layer of this incredible multidimensional being, what we really are. And maybe you can also sense now a quality of excitement in your system when you get reminded of that. And I deeply believe that in turning inwards and connecting to this life force, carrying the evolutionary impulse of our evolution, this is really a crucial and important part of our journey and of our opportunity and of our challenge right now we are in. And for a moment, you maybe also want to become aware of all other consciously evolving human beings now here on Earth. Sensing into this web weaving around the globe. Where we are interconnected. And where we are really becoming, I would say, encouragement and also a force which guides us, supports us in bringing a new way of being a human on this earth into our ordinary daily living, into our relationships, our workplaces, into all different areas of life. And even though we are often here, or maybe trying to be convinced that it's so important to look outside, maybe you agree that really the biggest treasure is inside. We are encoded with the possibility of who we can become right now. And maybe you can sense that. Or maybe you live it already and spread it and share it. And just before I introduce my colleagues and friends, just sense again into this powerful, alive field of conscious evolution. When we become aware of it, when we speak to it, when we surrender to it, it even becomes more powerful. And maybe you can feel it right now. Thank you for bringing your energy into that field. And I want to introduce now my colleagues and friends to you. In 2017, Ole Kjørefjord decided to transition from a successful 40-year career in business to support the development of the planet that we all desire, paradise on Earth. In January 2018, when Barbara Marx Hubbard asked if he could support her to organize humanity's co-creations in all sectors of the wheel of co-creation, his calling became ever greater and more focused. He is now devoting his life to supporting humanity's transition into the next phase of our evolution as the unified co-creative Homo Universalis. And I also welcome Andrea Harding. She is the driving force behind organomics and the Together Life System blueprint, which together offer a new set of principles and tools for organization based on living systems design and co-creative principles. Andrea has lived in communities across the world for over 8 years, exploring how people can organize socially through co-creation and the interpersonal dynamics required to move from mechanized, separation-based models of interaction to all-win, organic solutions that privilege life and care. A former collaborator with Barbara Marx Hubbard, Andrea is currently working in collaboration with several partners to bring forth the Together Life System blueprint through a planetary technology platform and new organizational framework she calls synergistic fractal organization. And she will share about that later, and I'm really looking forward to that because it's very exciting. And Ole, maybe you can share the slide for us where we share how we see this evolution happening right now. So please share our slide. Thank you. Yeah, so how we see it, that we are now in most, let's say the biggest part of population is now in the state of Homo sapiens, and where it's really about kind of existential issues and where you are very much defined by a conditioned self. And the part I'm really interested in and where I dedicate really my time and my resources is to support people in transitioning to Homo Universalis, which is what I kind of try to already point out in this introductory meditation, which is really totally connected and aware of this inner life force and this impulse of evolution. And what does it take to come into first transition and then fully embodying Homo Universalis? There are many different ways, but I really am fan of this, let's say, this quiet inner dropping deeper under the surface of what you mostly see operating in this world outside, this conditioned self, which always feels a lack, which always has the feeling I'm not enough, something is missing, I need to become a better person. I need to gain more skills. I need to have a bigger career. I need to have more money. I need to have a partner who looks like this and that. And of course, the whole advertisement industry and also a lot of how we are educated is really based on that and tries to convince us that something is missing, that we are not good enough, that we need something from outside. We need, I just named it. And when we really come into surrender to our brilliance of who we really are, and I bet that many of you who are now watching this panel, you had such moments where you realized that you are much more than this conditioned self. It's really about bringing that to the surface, bringing that into the life. I mean, often kind of in the moment when we realize some call it the deeper self or the real self, it can be a moment which feels really rich and where we feel nourished and where we are tapping into love, into abundance. And there is this deep sense, nothing is missing. Everything is provided, really everything. But then most of us have this experience that this realization and this moment really starts fading away. And then we tend to overlook the importance and the treasure of what we found and kind of orient again more to the surface. But my invitation is really to find whatever works for you to again and again tap into that resource in you, your brilliance, your genius, where you are totally connected to source and also informed of what is really relevant and what is really needed. And then take the steps which are needed to really live in alignment with this inner truth you are sensing, and not listening so much to what advertisement promotes. And also many, it's maybe a bit hard, but also many courses and many self-development courses, they are still operating on the surface and not really providing a space where you can tap into that and where you are really deeply convinced that this is important and this is meaningful. And as Jim already in the beginning, he spoke about Albert Einstein, and he really had this famous quote, so that the rational mind is really an amazing servant, and our intuition is a treasure, is a gift. And we have created a society which really worships the servant, but has forgotten this gift. And maybe we can really take this time of this huge crisis, because in my opinion and many others, tapping into that and realizing our deep self is now becoming really existential. It's not a luxury anymore. It's not a hobby anymore. It really needs to become the center of our life. And many say that what is right now happening is the awakening of the planet. And for when we are mainly identified with our conditioned self, we are not able to sense into this awakening of the planet, and we become very scared. And in my conviction, many of the reactions on many different levels which we see right now in the world are a cause of being afraid, because the world and the earth, how we knew it, is really changing. It's changing drastically, and this can make us very afraid and then cause reactions which just try to be in control. But in my sense, the opposite is needed: a deep surrender into the change. And it's a massive change. We need to let go of many things we are familiar with. So it's, in a way, you could say it's also a dying process which is now happening. And I want just remember you about this metamorphosis a caterpillar is going through. And there comes really the phase where the caterpillar needs to die. And often we have this knowing that something really new is called forth, but then we try to equip the caterpillar to become a butterfly. We maybe take on clothes which look like a caterpillar, or we try to get on wings to become a caterpillar. But no, the caterpillar needs to die in order that the butterfly can really emerge. And maybe you want to take what I share into your life and just reflect. Am I really willing to let go of this caterpillar life? And am I really willing to dare to trust, to listen to what is coming, emerging from inside, coming from the unknown? I deeply believe that we still need to tap much, much more into the unknown. We will not find answers and solutions out of what already exists. This trusting and surrendering into the unknown is a very crucial part. And when kind of you stabilize in shifting your orientation from the conditioned self more towards this deeper self or more true self, then comes really often the moment for us where we sense this deep, strong desire to contribute to a world we really want to live in. And then often it's really supportive when we come together with other people which support us in trying to find out how this can work, and also trying to find co-creators for that. And in this situation, I now want to hand over to Ole, because he will describe what he and others offer in this life purpose group. So Ole, I'm looking forward to what you have to share today.
Let's see, shall I turn on my own screen here? Here I am. Thank you. Well, I was very happy for Jim's question. How do we change consciousness? Because that is the theme that we're talking about. And the first step of changing consciousness is to move from being self-centered and recognizing, as Purya said, the deeper self, which is a part of a greater whole. a unique expression of source. And what I see is that there are now millions of people waking up, taking the step from Homo sapiens to be awakened. But there are millions of people sitting alone in their living rooms, so to speak, and not really knowing what to do. And what we want to do is actually to change, not only change consciousness, but also co-create the new planet that we want. And that is what Andrea will talk about after me. So I'm going to talk about this intermediary step to go from awakened to finding my life purpose and experiencing the resonant field of love with others. So let me see if I can do that. Yeah, so the awakened who are alone will transition into a purposeful and resonant self who has discovered and ignited their life purpose. Mark Twain said there are two important times in a person's life. The first is when you are born. The second is when you discover why you are born. But beyond this igniting the life purpose, it is also experiencing the shared resonant field of love with others. And I will change to another presentation. And go briefly through these steps. Because what we have found is that this process of finding my life purpose and experiencing the resonant field of love is done perfectly in small groups. So together with Barbara, we discovered the life purpose groups. So it starts by finding a group of up to 8 people, other awakened people, not people who are there to show off, not caterpillars, but butterflies, to explore life purpose. And we do that in a very simple way by finding people's availability all over the planet.
Ole, could you speak up a little louder, please?
Sure. We do that by asking people to show their availability, and we will match people's availability across the planet to meet with 8 people. And it's a divine order that is orchestrating this. When enough people are available at the same time on the planet, they will form a group. And they will meet weekly on Zoom calls for an hour and a half, for 2 months, or at least, or more than 2 years. And everybody meets everybody in the first meeting, and then there's a focus on one person in each of the subsequent meetings. And what happens is that we start to open ourselves and do an insecure exploration of why I believe I am on Earth. And we ask people to notice significant events in life. When did I get valuable insights? When I was 11 years old, I was at an international camp of 2 boys and 2 girls from 10 different countries. And I noticed that the boy from Japan or Costa Rica was equally fun to play with as the boy in my own backyard. And since then, my passport has no significance, for instance. And we also think about what are valuable skills that we have generated. And this gives us a clue about what our gifts are and what we have to offer to the world. And in this exploration, everybody received tender reflection from the other members of the group. And as a result, the feedback is universally, wow, what you want to do is so important. This is exactly what the world needs. So it creates a lot of self-confidence. We usually don't think so highly about ourselves. But this ignites our life purpose. But another thing that happens in this intimacy is that we experience heart resonance. That we kind of connect in a different energy field that we cannot connect with when we are alone. So more information about this is on the lifepurposegroup.org. Before I hand over to Andrea, I just wanted to make a couple of reflections. So one is that we can only change this world and not do it as a project, but do it with our full heart when it's connected with our life purpose. So that is the first point. We need to be driven by our purpose for being on earth. Then we will go on until we die with full energy, and that is what is needed. And the other thing that is needed is to appreciate all other people, and that happens in these small groups. I learned in my groups to see the world through the eyes of what I would call very strange people in my old business life. But when I connect with them and see the world through their eyes, I really enrich my life, and I really see that they have gifts to offer to the planet. So this creates the foundation for co-creation, that we recognize that we're all different fractals of source with different gifts, and that everybody has something important to offer. And I think about these small intimate groups as a test tube, in the sense that this is the way that all of humanity eventually will connect. We will see that everybody are wonderful people, that everybody has an important role and support each other. So this is the stepping stone to change our consciousness first as an individual, and then start to do it collectively, which Jim asked about. And from there we can change the world to co-create the world that our hearts desire. So I will hand over to Andrea for the next step.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Earl and Furia, for this beautiful kind of walkway into what I'm going to talk about. I am not feeling 100% myself today, but Furia, you just brought us into that coherent field of stillness and centeredness, and then just Earl, hearing you talk about, you know, the power of the fields that you've been in has just helped settle me. So thank you. Earl, I don't know if you want to put up your slide. Give us an overview of what we're doing today.
Sure, I will do that. I will.
Also, I can talk about it without, if it's too much to. Oh no, you've got it there. So I'm the other bookend for this sharing, and I'm going to now talk about what happens when we've been through this process of metamorphosis and awakening to what you might suggest is our deeper, truer self. where do we go from here, and how from that space of a new consciousness or an awakened consciousness, how might we create a new world? That is really what we describe as the co-creator. And what I'm going to talk about is how those people who have come through that process are now awakening to create a new paradigm and a new reality. So actually, I'll come out of here. I didn't need that very much. I've got some slides to share. So I'm going to do this in two different ways, or from two different angles. I'm going to speak generally about what's happening. At the beginning of the call, Ul and I and Puri were talking about what is our intention here. And partly it's to obviously impart our vision of what is happening. And secondly, it's to kind of hopefully share some news about what is actually happening, as well as the vision of what might come about, what is actually going on out there. Because there's a lot happening and not everybody knows about that. And also there are many awakened co-creators out there, but they can be feeling powerless in these times. And Jim, you talked about this at the beginning. Many of us see what's happening out there, but what can we actually do now to bring forth a transformation? So my organization is called Symphonics. My husband is also on the chat here to help me since I'm not 100%. And I'll share a little bit about what we're doing as well as the overarching kind of story that we're seeing. So Ul and Puria have talked a lot about the shift in consciousness that is occurring and how we are evolving as beings. And that happens at two levels. As Puria talked about, there's the self-development that we do, and there's then how we come into co-creation or communion with other people who are in that kind of space. And Ul talked about that a lot coming into the resonant field. We used to joke that that was a bit like the Avengers movie, where everybody's learned to be their own superhero, but look what happens when a group of superheroes come together. Even that is a stage of our evolution. If any of you have seen the Avengers, you know they fight a lot at the beginning. So a lot of self-work is done at that stage too, and learning to act and co-create in the resonant field. Then for us, what comes out of that is a new being. I mean, Barbara used to talk about the butterfly emerging from the goop, and that new butterfly has these different values and different ways of experiencing the world, and no longer the world that they're in doesn't really align with how they want to experience life so much anymore. So I've talked about here about some of the values that co-creators have that we are working with, like, and have been for the last 8 years. Some of the things that characterize, I guess, Homo Universalis for us are things like health and harmony have come to define success. We no longer use these one-dimensional views of what success might look like, for example, only materialistic perspectives. Another key thing which defines co-creation to us is co-creators have started to want to see what we call omni-beneficial interactions. What we mean by that is we've moved to a view of an all-win reality. Now, if we look at the reality we are in, there's a win-lose kind of dynamic. Co-creators, for us, have moved out of that, and it's really, really connected to the heart energy that's awakening, because the heart, if we really, really are connected to it, always wants to, see ourselves be healthy and thriving and flourishing, but also wants the same for others. And whether that can happen within the body or it can happen within the whole of the world and society that we're in with. So this has come to be known as the Game B perspective, the all-win perspective, but this also comes to define how co-creators see the world. There's a focus on our ability to perceive holistically. So we go from that reductionist way of seeing the world to seeing a multi-dimensional kind of reality and being able to perceive that everything is interconnected. That comes from knowledge of the self as much as anything. Any holistic healers out there will obviously know what I'm talking about. There's a living systems focus, so moving away from the mechanized ways that we have operated in, the machine age. Are we really machines? Not really. When we've woken up, we understand we're not machines. and we're living systems with needs that are different to how machines operate. And a lot of the machine age thinking is, of course, what is bringing increasing destruction to the planet. And there's some other things on there. I've talked about there's a leaning away from as well. So what you start to see is a leaning away from transactional thinking, separation thinking, systems that exploit and mechanize life, competition and scarcity, and then just the idea that the only thing that exists is matter and what we can actually see, material things. So coming out, that butterfly has got a new window on the world, and what it starts to bring forth is a desire for a foundational shift. And Barbara talked about this a lot, the fact we will want, or we will, through our evolution, then attempt to make a quantum leap in the way that we're operating and living. So what I've shared here is that, therefore, from our perspective, what we are seeing over and over is as co-creators wake up and they come to co-create the new world, their starting point is not just on creating new projects, new businesses, new kind of things that can address the issues that we have here on the planet, but it's way more broader in scope. The focus is on full system shift. And again, Barbara talked about this a lot for the people that are familiar with Barbara here. But it's no longer just good enough to kind of look at the symptoms and kind of all things that are creating the world that we're living in and how they are systemic causes for a lot of our problems. Because ultimately, as I'll come on to talk about, the foundational way that we're operating is a result of the consciousness that we are actually in. So I've talked about here how we see it specifically at Symphonics is that the current system has 12 competing interests with life, and that co-creators are now focused on shifting the system so that it creates 12 wins for life instead. And for any of you that are interested, co-creation is one meme, but other memes that people use to talk about the shift are the shift to regenerative systems, or game B, as I've mentioned before, and the term infinite games is often being used too. This diagram is kind of an overview of a vision that a group, or many groups that I've been working with for the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years. It's a visual of attempting to describe how a whole system shift might look. So, you know, what we mean by that is, as I've mentioned before, we can't just fix, say, for example, environmental issues alone. It won't be enough. So we have to take this holistic lens of how can we shift many things together to create this whole systems leap. And that will therefore create a whole system shift. And this diagram, the Together Life System Blueprint, which is a vision that was created by, as I say, many groups, is a vision for all the different things we think would have to be created to make this systems leap. So why I'm presenting this is because the shift itself will be co-created. It won't be like there'll be just one group or one series of innovations that somehow quantum leap the planet. It'll be many, many groups working together through co-creation that allow us to take this whole systems leap together as one. How we go about taking this whole systems leap, is a complicated question. There are many, many things that are misaligned for co-creators with the current paradigm. But while there are many, many things that we can tackle, there is one foundational thing from the perspective of Symphonics and many of our partners that needs to be addressed, and that's what we call separation thinking. Now, I would go as far as to say, in fact, I'm not going as far to say, it just is a fact, I guess, or a truth for me, that the reason we have separation thinking is because people have been disconnected from their hearts. As I mentioned at the beginning, if we're in heart consciousness, we care for ourselves as in balance with how we care for others. It's like a balance of breathing in and breathing out. When we make that disconnection, or when we disconnect from that energy, that is kind of the soil through which separation thinking emerges. But ultimately, regardless of where it's coming from, the systems that we're operating in, whether it's at the smaller level, say, of an education system, or the bigger level of the whole socioeconomic system, it's all built on separation thinking. Ull talked about this as this kind of I don't know, focus on self-interest. And that focus on self-interest, which is as long as I'm okay, then that's all that matters. It's that focus that is coming from this separation thinking that as long as I take care of myself, then the world's going to be okay. That is kind of a delusion or illusional. If we look at it, when we actually think that way, we don't notice the impact of our self-interest. We don't notice, for example, if we only take care of our own island, that, you know, we might be exploiting resources somewhere else and other places dying, but ultimately that separation in the end is artificial, because in that other place at some other point in time, if there's a forest fire there, that's going to affect us. We deplete somebody else's resources, and then ultimately, let's take the example of the Amazon, that depletion affects all of us, ultimately environmentally. So many systemic issues emerge from thinking that we're all separate from each other. And only when we understand that we're one whole. Puria, you talked about, I don't know if it's in your attunement or at the beginning when we chatted, we're one multidimensional being really beneath the surface. But there's the oneness at the spiritual level, and there's how we experience that as a planetary ecosystem. Actually, every single thing is interconnected, and it's only when we understand our impact on others can we address many of the systemic issues that we face in the world. I just want to also mention, if you can take that thinking and apply it to pretty much anything. Think of health. Our current health model is based on separation thinking, that somehow if I mechanically just address an organ that has an issue, I'll heal my body. But all of us that are into holistic healing, we know that that's not how the body functions. It's a holistic system. So it runs through all parts of our system. Can I just do a check on time? I don't want to do a time. Okay, I'm doing okay. I just shared this went round, did the rounds the other day on Twitter. A young person sharing about, you know, like how we celebrate. I'll read it. You know, if a monkey hoarded more bananas than it could eat, while most of the other monkeys starved, scientists would study that monkey to figure out what the heck was wrong with it. When humans do it, we put them on the cover of Forbes. It's like it's speaking to this what I was just talking about. We live in a system that's normalized greed, and others accruing more when others don't have enough. And if those monkeys were connected with each other and cared about each other as a whole and were not in competition and scarcity, you will not see that kind of issue. So yeah, it was just speaking to that a little bit. So out of that, I mean, there's many co-creators and groups looking at how we overcome that fundamental issue in one way or another. And I'll speak about what we're doing. I just want to be clear that there's many projects, and I will start to talk about those at the end. The piece that we're working on at Symphonics is helping to create organizational structures that allow co-creators and what we call them agents. Agents can refer to any individual, communities, businesses, organizations, however you might represent yourself as a creative agent in the world. Our work is to create structures that now start to allow those agents to see how they're part of a bigger whole and how everything that they do affects the larger whole. So we no longer just think about ourselves, but we think about ourselves in relation to our other selves. And I like this idea of the cell, of like we're cells in a larger body. So our structures they're not structures that you would just say, for example, there's a lot of talk about this and it's happening, of say companies now starting to think of themselves as social organisms. That is happening, and it's super related to this. This is also just a little bit different in that our social organism structures are what organizations, companies and individuals will start to organize inside of. And once we start to use that type of thinking of organizing like a social organism, not just organizations, individuals, people, it starts to be able to shift our thinking entirely. So I've put some of the things on the screen there that relates to. But for example, we start to think of ourselves as one body. Everybody's a part of the whole. And if the body's not succeeding, then how are all of us succeeding? The whole is a reflection of how well we're operating together, just like Andrea, you know. If Andrea's sick, there's something kind of out of alignment, I guess, in my inner system. So the whole is as important as the parts. We also, if we use a body kind of way of thinking, we can think of every single contribution is crucial. If we look at our current reality, some contributions aren't considered to be as important as others. So whereas we think of a body, it doesn't matter whether like you're a tiny organ or a large organ. If a tiny organ fails, your body still might not work. So starting to think about all of us have a role to play, all of us are important, all of us have a function, is also part of this way of organizing. The big leap, which is usually the question everybody has for us, is what happens to money? Well, the body, number one, is not a transactional system. The body flows resources to all its organs using heart intelligence. It flows oxygen, based on a whole number of different parameters. But certainly what you don't see is any of the organs fighting with each other and some organs having more than what they need. The body's always in flow, circulating. So this is the model that we start to look at, is how can we all have resources and flow them so that not only is each part thriving, but also the whole is thriving. And that starts to take us into a resource flow model. Some of you might have heard of resource-based economy kind of ideas. It's very connected to that. And then coordination, if we look at the current world that we're in, we're not organized at a planetary level. There's many, many, many groups doing many, many similar things. They're competing, they're not sharing their intelligence. And there's a lot of waste and a lot of redundancy. What if we started to coordinate at the planetary level as we did the organizational level? Let's look at how much more intelligence we have, how much smarter we are. And as Barbara said, we'd start to converge our thinking rather than competing over it. And what starts to happen then is we can do and create more and more and more. And ultimately, using a body way of organizing means that if the larger way we're organizing is harmonic, it's harmonized with the individual level. What that means is what is good for me is good for the whole, and vice versa. This might all be a bit abstract for now. I'll carry on. I might be able to illustrate something a bit better. So OmniCore, which stands for Coherent Organization and Resonance Engine, is a technology that we are working on with other partners that will enable co-creators to perceive themselves as emergent social organisms and begin to start organizing that way. It has different components and it will be developed through software. It's actually quite challenging to understand what the power of this tool without us being able to see it at work. We've been prototyping for many years in a holonic technology called NUMAP, which some of you might have heard of, I'm not sure. So we have some idea of how this will work, but ultimately, for now, I can only describe it. But the core pieces of OmniCore are there's a new way of perceiving organization, as I've just talked about, or we call them Huria, I think on my slides, or Ula had synergistic fractal organizations. We're actually calling them UFOs now, united fractal organisms. And united fractal organisms have within them also united fractal organs. And it's a massively infinite fractal system. There's no end to the amount of agents that can be part of a UFO. So don't think of a UFO as similar to, for example, a normal company like Microsoft. It isn't. It is a huge at-scale phenomena involving hundreds of agents organizing like an organism. And I've talked a little bit how it's structured like a body, but other pieces that it has are, for example, we use fractal and holonic ways of thinking. So what that allows for, as I've just mentioned, is complete infinite scaling of the system. And those UFOs unite around a shared purpose. I'm going to come on to something that illustrates how that helps us to move out of the current way of organizing. But ultimately, just to sum it up, most companies are not, and most ways of that we organize even socially are not organized around social purpose. They're motivated by other things. It also has a social DNA and code system, which helps everybody self-organize. There's going to be no boss in this organization. It organizes itself. Just as your body grows itself, it uses exactly the same principles to organize. And And what will happen there is if you're a co-creator, which I'll come on to a little bit more, it organizes you based on your purpose, which you just talked about. So we've started to understand what we want to do in the world. We've had our Mark Twain moment. Now let's find our tribe. And that's what this system will help you to do. And then orgospheres are like the new kinds of organizational departments. So if you think of a company has departments, these are like major league level departments, but they work to support us to organize as living systems and through emergence. So they're not mechanized. They're like your body, right? You can join an orgosphere and it can shift and change depending what's happening, and you can jump to another one. Development's underway with this right now, so we can show how it will work, because it's kind of not easy to explain without becoming complicated, at least when I'm not on a good day, like today. I've shared a quote from, many of you might have read this book. It's called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. He describes here how organizations of the future will likely organize. And I would say that gives you the best description of what I've just shared will enable. So I'll just read it. It's conceivable that in the future, the evolutionary purpose, rather than the organization, will become the entity around which people gather. The specific purpose will attract people and organizations into fluid and changing constellations according to the needs of the moment. People will connect in different capacities, full-time, part-time, freelance, volunteering, and organizations will join forces or disband in reaction to what best serves the purpose of the moment. The boundaries of an organization might be harder to trace, and the very notion of the organization less relevant. I can't give you a better description of what our system will do. It will do that. But this is already, and by the way, just to be clear, this is already how co-creators are organizing. They just don't have tools from our perspective to scale. What does it mean for a co-creator? You know, like that's all very systems kind of focused. What does it mean if you're a co-creator on a journey? Well, when we have our tools ready, which will be developed using what we're calling Web 3.0 technology, which is technology that's kind of way more like living systems infrastructure. It will be modeled more on how the brain functions. When we have that technology, co-creators will be able to jump in, find the resonant groups and get clear on how they're co-creating, and then from there identify their purpose, and then be located to other groups who share their purpose. So they've learned how to operate in a resonant field. Now they're going to co-create in a resonant field. And what they'll be able to do is see how their grouping is working alongside all the other groupings in this larger social organism. And from there, then some of the other things we've talked about can start to happen, i.e. we're moving out of co-creation now, there's no competition, we're working in an emergent way, how life systems organize. We can start to understand how all those different groups have what we call these omni-beneficial interactions and so on. I did want to talk about this because this is because of where we started. A lot of people for many years have been talking about the awakening of the global brain with the internet. We actually think with the kind of technologies that are about to happen and come in with our piece and others, we will start to see the emergence of a global heart and global heart technology. Because you cannot function co-creatively in this new type of way unless you're able to operate in your heart yourself. What do you care? I mean, I've heard this over and over from groups that are in Game B. They're like, do you think people really will be able to put away their baggage and really care about others as well as themselves? And I'm like, yeah, I do really think that because I see it every day. But it's true that others won't be able to move into this until they've gone through the kind of corridor that Puria and Il were describing. And it's true that the ones that will thrive in this system will be heart-based. So the system facilitates a heart-based way of working, but we also need to get in our hearts to get into it. I thought I'd mention Barbara, since she's an ongoing theme in this call. We have worked with Barbara, we did work with Barbara, and for me, the technology that I'm describing is what will actually allow the synergy engine, as Barbara saw it, to start actually to happen. because what it does is through those different fields that coordinate how different groups are working together, it then gives them tools on how to bring their innovations together into what I call a synovation. So they're no longer competing, as Barbara talked about over and over, they're coming into synergy and they're starting to converge. So imagine the current system. I might develop an innovation for a car and somebody over the way develops a similar innovation for a car. We'd be like, we're going to compete, right? We're not going to share our thinking. That's ridiculous. Like, we need to share the market. This is not how social organisms work. They have the tools to say, okay, I'll have my car blueprint, you have your car blueprint. Let's integrate them so we have the best engine and the best, I don't know, outer design, and we create the best possible car. We then circulate it and we flow the value back to us in a way that everybody's thriving. So it's a complete different model of operating, but ultimately it will allow for the synergy engine to actually function as a technology. How am I doing for time, Brett? I want to leave some time. It's what time? Okay, I'm almost done, everybody, so we can have some conversation. What do we stand to gain from this omni technology? There are many, many things benefits that it provides. The first one being the systemic stuff I talked about at the beginning. We start to move to thinking about ourselves as whole systems and interconnected beings instead of separate beings. And we start to understand how to work in a way where we care for each other and ourselves together. Beyond that, there are other things. I've mentioned some stuff here, don't need to go too far. One is clearly what I'm calling trans-organizational level coordination based on social goals and functions. So that immediately will cut down a lot of duplication, waste and redundancy. And when it comes to the environment, the sooner we can do that, the better, because we're wasting a lot of resources through competing and duplicating. The second thing is it enhances our creativity and efficiency and our collective intelligence. I've just talked about that. Put a group of people together with similar ideas, and if they go far enough, what they create will be way more effective than anything they would have created as parts. That's the whole principle of synergy. The whole is greater than the parts. So when we combine, I used a quote from Barbara, more creativity occurs. Whereas when we don't combine, we lose out on that additional creativity. An immediate use case for that is anybody who's co-creating right now. I call it the conversation chaos. I don't know how many people are involved in this, but without coordination, even somebody like me, I'll have like 20 conversations a week and I'll repeat and repeat myself, when if we'd all just got together in one conversation, we'd have been way more efficient. And that can only come with greater coordination. So there's a huge principle of coordination here, just as your body coordinates for optimum use of energy. I could get deeper into the energetics, but that's ultimately what homeostasis is, or what the traditions of Ayurveda and Chinese medicine might have called qi. Our energy is in balance and we want to use our energy optimally. I've put here ability to identify what living systems, function, roles and flows are out of balance with harmony. Well, guess what? Once we start to organize as a body, we can start to see what functions are dismissed as not important. In the body model, for example, the stomach is where in the model we're using, the production and the activity happens. But what about the root? What about how much are we caring for ourselves as much as how we're producing? We live in a paradigm that values productivity way more than being and self-care. So with the organism model, we can start to just like ourselves, look at where we're out of balance. We can look at which groups are not resourced and which ones are. And we can ask ourselves why we're not sharing, because often the groups that aren't resourced are providing value to the whole, and the only reason they weren't seen is because we couldn't see the value they gave to the whole. So for example, as a networker, how many of us are supported as like a community by networkers, yet they don't work for any one project, they work on behalf of all of us. So we can start to pieces of the whole and have the function they perform in the whole and acknowledge them. And then just ultimately enhanced awareness of the interconnection of the whole picture. An example I use for this are the social development goals produced by the UN. Often they have issues because they're looking at how we can realize the SDGs, but looking at them as separate to each other. with this kind of technology, we can see all the different groups working on which pieces and how they're interconnected, and how together, not individually, they'll realize the SDGs. So they're just some benefits. I'm nearly done. It was a long piece, my piece. I want to be super clear that, as I said at the beginning, our piece is only one piece. OmniCore is one function, but what I put on some of these other yellow hexagonal pieces are some of the other emergent aspects of a new operating system. And this is just the beginning. There are many, many co-creators with other pieces, and what we're doing through our technologies is starting to look how they interconnect and how we'll co-create all of these things so that they work together using these tools. So I won't go through these in detail, but they're all needed for the whole new system to function and allow us to move out of that scarcity competitive thinking that I talked about at the beginning. These are some of the groups that we're currently working with. There are many more of them, and they all hold different pieces, and it's emerging as we speak. So this is just the beginning. What we want to do with the groups that are currently here constellating, we want to create enough technology to allow the other groups to work with us at scale to develop the rest of it. And then that diagram, I think, is too much for today, actually. That's just showing you a whole user journey of all the different components of a new operating system to how we will how we can envision to organize through co-creation. The first steps I have here that we, through our own journey, identified were number you talked about. We can't go on this journey without our own self-awakening. And then the second piece that we identified is learning how to co-create with other, what you might call individuated, self-actualized people, which is the resonant field that Ul talked about. So it does flow from there. This new way of living and organizing can happen with those first two pieces. I'm complete. Thank you for listening to all of that.
Andrea, I just wonder, because there was this question coming up, how far are you in all of that right now?
Well, we are 8 years in from a design point of view. We did start out with having a vision of just putting it into technology, but what we realized is to live this is different to what it might look like, how we imagine it. So what the universe showed us in our own journey is we needed to experience, Puria, what you were talking about and what Ul talked about. And also it's what Carolyn Anderson, who worked with Barbara, talked about also. This need to go understand the resonant field. So there's been a lot of work in terms of research and development. We have a lot of blueprint work. Where we're at right now is we're starting to work with co-creators on a prototype technology, which will allow us just to see initial maps through the software. I imagine that we'll have something in the next 6 months. It might even be in 2 months, but in the world of emergence, I don't like to get too specific. But there's going to be something more immediately, but then that's integrating with a lot of work happening now on the organizational protocols, and that's happening right now. And again, I think there'll be a version 1 of what I'm calling a constitution within probably 6 months too. Then it will roll out, I think, across the next 2 to 3 years, the actual whole system build, something like that.
And I just wonder, as I saw that Brett was also active in the chat, if he finds something he would like to speak to from his observations from the chat.
Yeah, maybe he wants to come and show his face. Do you want to share anything about it? Just asking if you want to share anything from the chat.
Oh no, I was happy just to participate in the chat. So we'll sit with me then. I mean, together.
We'll be here together if there's anything else.
All right. So Jim, is there anything what you kind of want to ask or highlight from following this conversation?
Well, first I'd like to just echo what Sherry Herndon said in the chat, that the three of you are splendid successors to Barbara Marx Hubbard. You're carrying on her lineage, and in the end, what greater praise than to carry on the work of a loved one beyond their days, and to expand it and to make it more sophisticated and more intricate, as Andrea has demonstrated. I'm sure Barbara's looking down upon us from somewhere right now and is very pleased and very proud of what the three of you are continuing to work on in the world. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you both for it. And I think a question that emerges out of your work, particularly since we're in a time of a pandemic, when we're engaging in lockdown, physical distancing, isolations of all kinds, has this at all affected your thinking or your strategies? Or are you just considering the pandemic one more challenge to work through, but not in any particularly specific way?
Yeah, do you want to go first, Dale?
Doesn't matter. I think about the pandemic as a gift because it has forced people to connect with their inner self much more, with their fears, with their frustrations, and if anything, it has, I think, supported the personal evolution, and also, to have more time. So less distractions, actually.
Well, it's certainly given us a little more time.
Yeah, not so easy to escape from ourselves anymore. Thank you. I'm complete.
Yeah, Andrea.
Yeah, the funny thing about when the pandemic happened is that we were so used to working remotely and so used to working in the now that we almost didn't notice the pandemic. We were kind of like, everybody's operating a little bit more like how we operate. But of course, like at the deeper level, I think that number one, what the pandemic has showed us is the need, more than need for our kind of solutions in the future. My dad, who has watched our work for years, has never understood what we're doing. He's never got it. And for the first time, he came up to me in the pandemic and he was like, I think I can see why we would benefit from your kinds of solutions. Because firstly, what ergonomics does is it educates us on being resilient and how to organize as resilient systems and systems that can respond to shifts in our environment agilely as our own body does. Now, what we saw with the pandemic is the current system could not respond agilely. It still can't cope with sense-making issues, so that we have different parts of society trying to bring a worldview to what's happening, and they're competing worldviews, and it has no way of facilitating a kind of sense-making where we can all be in harmony. There's also, like, with a living system, how we can shift priority very quickly. So, for example, if we do have to lock down, I'm not saying that's resonant for everybody, but if we do have to lock down and use and create resources in a different way, we can agilely adjust without the whole system collapsing. What happens with the socio-economic system is its logic can't cope with that. And soon, if you're not careful, you end up with depression or economic issues. So what it did for me mainly, Jim, was point to the need for more resilient, agile systems and systems that allow for a more mature level of sense making. And also, like, what an ergonomic system does is it gathers collective intelligence and supports the organism to act based on the collective intelligence. What we have is a top-down way of operating, where we can't make sense of the collective intelligence in a way that everybody feels their needs are reflected. So again, that's something else that we would benefit from. So I mainly just saw, why we need to get moving.
Good, thank you.
And what I just would like to add is that I really appreciate that we now really see that the systems we have created from this paradigm of separation are really outdated and do not work and serve us anymore. So this becomes really more and more obvious, not just to the, so to speak, spiritual people. And I guess what we also can see that we are, the time is over to give all the authority to leaders. We all need to really step into our power and take care of what we see just in front of our house or in our community, and really, yeah, feel empowered and engage, and don't give away authority to so-called leaders. And this I appreciate very much.
Well, thank you, all three of you, Andrea, Ole, and Purya. This has been a splendid session. And as someone who knew Barbara for many, many years, it has brought joy to my heart to see how splendidly you're creating her successor lineage. That's so important to be able to carry forward the work of genius in different and powerful ways. So I really want to thank you, all three of you, for everything that you've done, and invite you to join our after session chat in a few minutes. You'll find the link in the chat box. And then I just want to say that starting tomorrow, everyone, we're going to spend 3 days on the issue of health in the pandemic. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Dr. Chris Beirer, who's the Desmond Tutu Professor of Medicine at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, deeply involved in the AIDS issue over many decades, and on a number of very prestigious panels with regards to COVID. We're going to talk with Dr. Beirer just about the pandemic. And I think the point that Purya just made is very important for us to hold, as we're being told by our governments that it's all about vaccinations. It may be in part, but the next day we're going to be talking about how you can increase your immune system, not through vaccinations, but through natural means. So there will be a very robust discussion of how we can very naturally and without big pharma increase our immune capacities to withstand diseases of all kinds, not just the COVID pandemic. And then on Thursday, we'll be returning for the third of 5 sessions on public health that's being convened by the Nordic Health Alliance and the Europe Health Futures Institute on the mental and public health dimensions of the pandemic. And so the consciousness that Purya and Ole and Andrea have been referring to today is very important as we delve into the details and the nitty-gritty of how we actually physically, medically, in terms of public health, continue to navigate through a pandemic that is now spawning variants and proving itself to be very intractable. The consciousness that we aspire toward has to be manifested in the day-to-day decisions that we make. And one of the biggest decisions out there is around vaccinations, public health, personal health, and community resilience as we navigate through this challenge. So I want to thank everyone for a splendid session today. You've raised all of our consciousnesses, and we are deeply grateful to you. And we'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same station, here on Zoom at 5:00 p.m. Central European Time. And we'll see as many of you who are able in the after session chat starting in just a minute or two. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow here on Humanity Rising.
See you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Splendid session. Thank you, Purya.